Hi, I'm Dory Saltzman, author of Death of a Travel Advisor, and welcome to What's Your Alibi, the video series where I interview other indie mystery writers about their books and their crafts. Joining me today is Erin Hayden, the author of the Vista de Vino mystery series, which includes, I'm going to read the list because there's a bunch of them, Murder Uncorked, Lavender's Last Breath, Murder Under the Harvest Moon, The Wild Rover Returns, and The Dog Days of Summer. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, thank you.
I'm so happy that you're joining us. I have read Murder Uncorked. I can't wait to read the others. So we're going to start with one of the sort of main themes, sort of background themes to your books, and that is your son, C's son, being a type 1 diabetic, and learning to live with that is a central theme, especially in the first book, and still trying to figure things out and diet and stuff like that. Assuming you didn't just randomly pull that out of the air, just like, okay, I want to have a character with that type 1 diabetes. What is your connection to type 1 diabetes?
So my son, 13, was diagnosed at 1 year old. And he also has celiac, which also gets woven through. There's gluten-free recipes at the back of every book. So diabetes and celiac together are kind of a central theme. Sometimes they're just in the background because people who live with these conditions, it's just always there and it's always in the background. Other times it does become a plot line sometimes because really it can completely disrupt your life. Sometimes you're like going and flowing and things are great and things just fall apart. And sometimes things fall apart in real life and things fall apart in a mystery investigation. So
Exactly.
it does a little bit of both.
Yeah, and I mean, if we think about the first book, you also even used it as a clue, as something that could have been part of the mystery, which I thought that was great, and also was a nice way of showing some of the things, her own thoughts, Casey's
Mhm.
own thoughts about diabetes and people on diabetes and stuff like that. So,
I
yeah.
also use it. I have a 13-year-old son who's a 13-year-old boy and a little bit teenager-ish, for lack of a better way to say it. And so I really try to bring her son, Liam, to light in his own way. So he is a pretty strong-minded character. Sometimes he likes to put Casey in his place. Things like, hey, just because you're my mom doesn't mean you get what it's like, right? And so he'll call her out sometimes where she's like, oh, I got this. And he's like, no, mom, you don't. You're not me. You're not walking in my shoes. And some of that is just typical teenage boy stuff. But as the series goes on, I think you see it a little bit in the first book, but it's just important to me that there's not just the primary character. A lot of the secondary characters are very strong in their own right. By the time we get to book 4, Liam is kind of stepping into his own as a secondary investigator.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so it's kind of like Ranger the Diabetic Alert Dog, who starts to really step up to the plate using his skills. Liam starts to come into it and like use his skills. So, because it is a running series arc, and there are a lot of different found family dynamics going on, it's important to me that I keep building the characters, the secondary and tertiary characters, stronger and stronger. So
Let's talk about chapter headings, chapter titles. It's not something that you see a lot anymore, particularly in cozy mysteries. But you go one step further. You have a chapter, like a chapter title, and then you have like this little cute little heading that is always related to something that's going to happen in that chapter. So what made you decide to do both? How much work goes into coming up with them? I have to imagine a lot of angst would go into that.
yes. And so I'm going to admit, I'm thinking, is it book? I'm looking. Book, I want to say, yeah, book 1, book 2, they have those secondary headings. By like 3 or 4, I was like, no, book 3 has it. I feel like at some point I was like, I think book 4, the subheadings kind of go away. I'm like, I'm tired.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I still, like obviously cozy mysteries are characterized by I'm not a very quirky person, and I don't feel like I do the play on words as much as some other cozy mystery authors, but I do always have a title that deals with what's going on. So there's chaos, something happens in book 4, and something big has happened, and now you've got the title, the band plays on. So now we're gonna like kind of move into the next row. It's a little bit of a preview to what's coming,
Mhm.
but I'm not going as deep into that, especially because I think as I started writing more, it's like you start to see the way chapters develop and change. And I was like, I think angst was a good word to use. It just created so much angst. I'm like, I think I'll just stick with the basic titles.
Yeah. Do you remember what made you
Yeah.
decide that you wanted to do them in the beginning?
Um, I feel like it gave me a framework, like for me, because when I first started, I was really a full blown pantser.
Okay.
And because that's the way I've always written, even with my nonfiction writing, like I was just like, let's just go, we'll let it flow. And as I started making my way through the series, I found that that was causing me too much stress, where I started plotting a lot more. By the time I got to book 4, my outlines were upwards of 2,000 words per chapter. So it was like by the time I had an outline, I almost had an entire novel done. And then I would go back in and do the scene work. That makes it a lot easier for me to kind of work in the nooks and crannies of my life.
Mhm.
So when I first started with book 1, I had a little more free time. Now my life is like I've got a lot going on. You know, I'm a professor and I'm a notary and I've got a kid in travel hockey. So I need to be able to like sit down and say, I've got 2 hours to work with. What can I accomplish? And I feel like that's really hard to do as a pantser,
Yeah.
because when I was doing it that way, I was constantly going back and I'd have to reread 2 full chapters to get back into the groove to start writing. And it's like, well, there goes half an hour of my writing time. But having the chapter heading and subheading for me was kind of like, okay, right, I've got my framework. So it was, I guess, my skeleton, right?
Okay.
Where once I started really mapping out the chapters more, I didn't quite need that so much. So I think my writings evolved in that regard.
Oh, I'm sure over the course of 5 books I mean,
Hmm.
it has to have. It's funny when you just said that you need to have a period of 2 hours. I feel like if someone said to me that I had to write chapter headings the way you were doing it, that alone would take me 2 hours just to come up with a cute, like, chapter
Oh, well,
head.
that was when I had longer stretches and I had more
Right.
free time. So
Yeah.
I could map things out like that. And then if I came and went and did whatever, I still had a focus.
Right.
Where now it's like, because I'm going and I'm really mapping out the whole book, and before I sit down and actually start writing the scenes,
Yeah.
I don't need the structure at the top because I've got the structure in the body.
Right.
So
Yeah.
then 2 hours is functional, you
Right.
know?
One thing I noticed very strongly in your first book, and again, I've only read the first, so you can tell me if this is something that you continue doing into the second and third, was that every chapter, up until like the last, I want to say 3 to 4 chapters, every chapter started with some aspect of the environment, either like fog or wind light coming in through the window or diffused light or something that was very usually light focused, but sometimes had to do with mist and things like that. And then towards the end, it becomes aromas in the kitchen. And so, I'm really curious if that was a conscious choice or if that was something that was just sort of coming out as you were writing. And if it was conscious, what was the purpose for doing it that way?
It was definitely conscious. The reason I started moving more into aromas is because I was like, why is it always so focused on the visual? Right. But I really felt like I needed to ground the scene. And there was one a writer that I was listening to, and she was talking about this kind of uh the kind of the moods of the way each chapter begins and ends, right? With different emotional arcs in each chapter. And I'm not going to sum it up. I'd have to think too long and it would pause the whole thing. But what I got from her was really this, like, if we're starting maybe exciting, then we end the chapter on something a little more tense, or, vice versa, where your mood is shifting, where you're kind of bringing the reader on this emotional roller coaster. And so, again, I think that was really helping ground me too. Like, where are we starting mood wise? But then as I went through, I'm like, you know what? This is maybe too amateurish. Like, I can't keep starting. And probably some of that did come from, I have an MFA in creative writing.
Okay.
And that was some of the elements that I learned, when taking my program. But I realized, okay, that's really basic. So now I need to build on that. I need to get better, right? So when I look at book 1, I'm like, "Oh gosh, I hope people will go on and read to book 3 because the writing gets much better," right? Like I've learned. So although my master's was in creative writing, it was primarily creative nonfiction, memoir and things like that. And at the time, I thought, I'm not going to do fiction, but I started writing a fiction series for my son, the type 1 diabetic, because there wasn't a series for him.
Right.
And I wrote one of the books as a mystery and I loved it so much. And I was like, I've always loved mystery. Why am I not writing mystery for grown-ups? So I started doing it. But I'd still say even with 5 books in the kids series and 5 books in the adult mystery series and a YA, like, I would still consider myself a developing writer, of course, right? And each book, I learned some things from my beta readers, from listening to my books on audio, from getting feedback the online spaces from strangers, and I take that and I use that to refine my craft. So, sometimes it's just, "Oh, yeah, there's a lot of visual sensory detail here, but what else is going on?" And I'm like, "Oh, you know what? You're right. Let me reflect on that and let me improve on it." For me personally, I love reading all different authors. I like change. So just because I don't love your first book doesn't mean I won't stick it out to the second and third because I like to see writers grow. That's probably also the educator in me. So I appreciate when I see people saying things like, oh, the second book or the third book is better because of X, Y, and Z. It means, you know what? They were like, oh, I'm watching this person progress and it's kind of a fun journey. I think we as indies really embrace that growth mindset. So hopefully our readers do too.
Yeah. Oh, we definitely, I think so. And I think people who choose to read indies, at least people who are consciously choosing to read indies, understand that. I'm curious. Are you a visual? Do you see the world that way?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a visual learner. I'm a visual person. I don't process in words very well. I always have an inner dialogue going. I'm always thinking in words. I know some people think in music, some people think in colors. Like
Right.
there's a lot of interesting brain science out there. The words are always going in my head. But what happens is when people talk, my processor just like shuts down. The little spinny wheel is just going, going, going. I need some kind of like pictures, scenes, something to ground myself, and then I can kind of move on. So if I'm just jumping into a scene or, there's some kind of action, but I don't know where I am, I feel very lost and disoriented.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
think it's interesting because I think something I've sort of noticed about writers in general is that we fall into one of two categories. People who start their scenes grounding it in the scene and going visual, and then people, and I fall into the second camp. I almost always start with dialogue.
Mm.
It almost always starts with action and dialogue, and I think that writers fall into the two different things. So I'm not a very visual person. I have a hard time picturing things in general. I am definitely more oral and word oriented, and so that's how how I move. And so it's so fascinating to me how they fall into those two things. And so when I was seeing that, I was like, she must be a visual person because she's starting with what she's seeing versus anything else, whereas
What's
yeah.
interesting though that you said that, because now I'm thinking back to where I first started my fiction journey with the kids' books, and
Right.
my first beta reader was my son, and we read together every single night. But I would read with him out loud my chapters as I went, and I started the kids series writing with a dialogue first approach, and he hated it, and he asked me to revise it, and so then I started changing my writing. Um, so yes, I'm visual, but I think a lot of it also came from the feedback from him, and he's
Right.
actually been a really constructive beta reader for me, so
That's so fascinating. Is he visual too?
I guess so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I might have to like look into it later, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I love that he was like, "Yeah, no, change
No,
it."
this doesn't work for me.